mayoral candidate, Zohran Mamdani. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. So this is, you have been surging in the polls lately. Tell our viewers just a little bit about yourself. You were born in Uganda, but you said you moved here when you were 7 years old. Help explain to our viewers who you are.
Absolutely. So I was born in Kampala, Uganda, in East Africa, moved to New York City when I was 7, grew up in Morningside Heights, went to Bronx Science, and now I represent Astoria and Long Island City in the state assembly. I'm in my 3rd term, and as of a few days ago, we'd been in this race for 6 months, and as you've said, we have surged. In that time, we found that New Yorkers are hungry for a different kind of politics. They're hungry for a politics that puts working people first, and that's what our campaign is doing to win a city that New Yorkers can actually afford.
Exactly. And you're a democratic socialist, the only democratic socialist running in the race. So what does that mean for you?
To me, that means that every New Yorker has what they need to live a dignified life, that it's local government's responsibility to provide that. And I think when you ask New Yorkers in their day-to-day, do they believe in things like public transit, public education, they agree with it. It's just that so often these kinds of ideas have been caricatured as if they're beyond what people actually want, when in fact it's exactly what they want.
So you have a whole list of priorities, and
Yes.
I'm going to just list a few of them because they're all that could fit on this graphic here. But you want to freeze a rent for rent-stabilized apartments, make buses fast by building priority bus lanes and make buses free, provide free universal childcare, create a department of community safety, and build a network of city-owned grocery stores. So we're going to pull a few of those out here and talk about them. So first, for the free childcare. For every New Yorker aged 6 weeks to 5 years. That sounds great, but who's going to pay for it?
So we've actually put out a platform that outlines exactly how we'd pay for not only that part of the agenda, but the entire agenda. We would raise $10 billion a year in 2 key ways. The first is raising taxes on the most profitable corporations in New York State to that of the level of New Jersey. New Jersey has a corporate tax rate of 11.5%. In New York, we're at 7.25%. If we match that, that's $5 billion. Then raising income taxes on the top 1% of New York City earners, New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more, by just a flat 2% increase. This is a rounding error for New Yorkers who make that much money, but for the entire city, including those same New Yorkers, this would be transformative. And the final $1 billion from that 9 to make it 10 is by actually bringing good government back to City Hall. Procurement reform, hiring fiscal auditors, and ensuring that we're collecting the money that we're owed. Because what we see is when you want to fight for working people, people say you can't afford it, but actually the solutions are right here in front of us.
If you tax corporations and people, the 1%, how do you ensure that they don't leave New York?
So when I first came into the state assembly, this is what I was hearing as well, as we were fighting to raise revenue to fund our city's schools. And we had a governor then, Andrew Cuomo, who didn't want to raise any revenue, who wanted to leave our schools in the state that they were. But here's the truth about corporate tax law. It applies to any corporation that does business in New York, not that's headquartered in New York. So if that corporation moves, they're still subject to the same tax laws. And ultimately, our economy is so strong, $1.3 trillion, that no one is going to cease doing business. And then, in that same year when I came into the assembly, we overcame Andrew Cuomo's objections to tax his donors and raised about $4 billion a year to fund our schools. And what we saw is that there was no exodus of millionaires. We actually have more millionaires today than we did then. What we did see, though, is an exodus of working class New Yorkers who couldn't afford housing, childcare, groceries. And what this would do is take $25,000 a year off the backs of working parents who are currently having to pay more to put their 2-year-old into childcare than they would to send their 18-year-old to CUNY. That's just unacceptable. And we've seen that in Quebec when they did this, they saw a 10-to-1 return on their economic investment.
You also want to create a Department of Community Safety, and it would have a budget of roughly $1 billion, consist of mental health teams that respond to 911 calls, and have outreach teams at 100 subway stations. So first, which of these 911 calls would these mental health teams respond to?
The ones that are clearly New Yorkers calling in need of an intervention in a mental health crisis. I'll give you one example. I sat with the family of Win Rosario, a young New Yorker who was in the throes of a mental health crisis, called 911 himself to ask for assistance. 2 police officers were sent who had been trained in mental health response, and they killed him within 3 minutes. That is something that does not serve anyone in that situation. He is someone his family is still grieving, and it doesn't leave our city safer. And what we've seen is that across the country, there have been these very approaches that have been successful, whether we're talking about in Eugene or Olympia or Denver. This approach that we're speaking about is evidence-backed, and that's what New Yorkers deserve. They deserve outcomes. They deserve to actually have the safety they've been promised, but they haven't been delivered. And at the core of this is when we ask New Yorkers, where do you feel least safe? They often say the subway system. And that's why we've said we're going to have teams of dedicated outreach workers at the 100 subway stations with the highest levels of homelessness and mental health crises to intervene and provide assistance in the moments when New Yorkers need it most.
You know, we know that many people going through mental health issues are not violent in any sort of way, but on rare occasions there are instances where there is maybe some violence. How do you ensure the safety of these mental health teams if they're in the subway and something does go wrong?
You know, they can always call the police. That is a part of this program, and we've seen that, for example, in one of the programs I was citing elsewhere in the country, about 80% of the calls are resolved without police assistance. And there is a small segment that requires it, and for that, it is possible. But ultimately, what we're doing right now is we're taking the police, who have a critical role to play in creating public safety, and we're tasking them with every single failure of the social safety net. And that's preventing them from doing their actual jobs, which is dealing with major categories of crime. And what I've heard from so many New Yorkers is a concern that the clearance rates of those crimes are so low. And part of it is because police officers don't even have time to focus on it anymore.
Would the $1 billion for this department come from the police budget?
No, not a dollar would come from the police budget.
Perfect. And then lastly, one of your platforms to build city-owned grocery stores in each one of the 5 boroughs. It's really gotten a mixed bag response here. You know, I think a lot of people want to see everyone have access to healthy food. And you propose like lowering costs by using city land or buildings, building food, buying food wholesale, and being exempt from property taxes. So I guess, you know, how would this proposal work, you know, actually, you know, foots on the ground?
Look, I think some of the critique I've heard have been from people like John Katzimatidis, who runs Gristedes and is making quite a good bit of money off of New Yorkers in this moment. What I've heard from more New Yorkers, however, is that whether they're making $40,000 or $200,000, when they go to the grocery store, they feel that sticker shock, that the same items they could comfortably buy years ago are now seemingly out of reach. And I look at the example in Kansas, where they have a municipal-owned grocery store. I look at the feasibility study in Chicago, which found that we could do this in an urban setting. And I think about, why should New Yorkers not have that? Why should they not have not only access, but the ability to buy goods that are within their price range? So the core of this is cheaper groceries as a guarantee. The cost of this is $60 million to set up one store in each borough. So that's 5 stores as the pilot program. Now, that should be compared to the city's existing program called City Fresh, where they're set to spend $140 million subsidizing corporate grocery stores without any requirement for lower prices, any requirement for collective bargaining, or any requirement that they even accept SNAP or WIC. So we would take less than half of the money the city's already set to spend and actually deliver results.
From my understanding, it seems like Chicago just recently decided not to go with the city-run grocery store and maybe do like a public market sort of a thing instead. And then the Kansas store, it required, it seems, from my understanding, a lot of volunteer work, donations to sort of get it going.
You know, what we are seeing in our city is an incomparable capacity to deliver on this kind of a promise. And I am confident that by putting city government behind a actual tangible plan to deliver cheaper groceries, we would be able to deliver that without the need of volunteers, but rather through the power of the public sector.
So now critics have also brought up your stance on Israel, and Israel usually isn't a topic for a mayoral race, but with this year, with everything going on, I know a lot of people have critiqued your stance, and so I just wanted to get you on the record where you stand and give you a chance to respond. So, you know, 7 days after the Hamas terror attack in Israel, you were arrested for protesting outside Senator Chuck Schumer's office. Why did you feel the need to get involved so early and so quick after this terror attack?
So I had already said then, as I say now, that October 7th was horrific and it was a war crime. And I was invited by Jewish New Yorkers to attend that protest. It was actually organized by thousands of Jewish New Yorkers. And I stood with them outside to make clear that their tragedy, their immense suffering, should not be used as a justification for the creation of more of that. And what we were seeing even that quickly was an immense amount of a military attack that was killing tens of and hundreds and thousands of Palestinians, innocent civilians. And at the core of my position about Israel, Palestine, any place in the world, is consistency and international law and human rights. Because I believe that justice, freedom, safety, those are things that should be applied to all people. And sometimes when you say that, you're caricatured in ways that have nothing to do with what you've actually said.
So do you believe that Israel has a right to statehood? And if you're elected mayor, how would you have responded to some of the Palestinian protests that have been happening on college campuses here in the city?
I believe that Israel has a right to exist. I've said so, and I will continue to say so. And I believe that the First Amendment is a cherished right of this country and is so much of what makes me proud to be an American. I think that we've seen that as something that is under attack by the Trump administration, and it requires us to stand up for our Constitution and our New Yorkers, while also making very clear that these protests are things that we should always ensure they are within the bounds of that First Amendment, and that's what I have seen by and large.
Now, you also were the first mayoral candidate to hit the fundraising cap.
Yes.
And you just released your first TV ad. So we're going to take a look at it real quick here and discuss.
It's because corrupt politicians like Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo have sold us out to billionaires and corporations, rigging the economy against us. Now, Cuomo's running for Adams' second term. I'm Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani, and I have a different vision.
So you have been great at social media, great at these videos. I've seen you go viral multiple times now. And you really kind of hit in this TV ad, at least, on former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Tell me more about your goal with this ad.
I want to introduce Andrew Cuomo as the governor that he was, not the governor that he says that he was. And there's a clear difference here, where so much of his reputation is a mythology that he helped to burnish with public dollars, even as he received a $5 million advance for writing about his leadership in a crisis which sent at least 15,000 New Yorkers to their death in nursing homes. And so the opening of this ad is those facts. This is a governor who cut Medicaid. This is a governor who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA. This is a governor who's been credibly accused of of sexual harassment by more than 10 women, and introducing him as really running for Eric Adams' second term, because that's what this is. And then in contrast, our campaign, a campaign for people to actually be able to afford the city that they call home.
He is leading by double digits right now, but you are second, at least, in the race. A lot of people are saying this is a two-person race right now. What are your goals over the next 2 months to close that gap?
You know, what is so exciting to me is we're in second place, even though 50% of New Yorkers still don't know who I am or what we're fighting for. And that's an opportunity, because it is so much easier to introduce yourself to someone than convince them to feel otherwise. 100% of New Yorkers know who Andrew Cuomo is, but less than 50% support him. And if we can get to that same 100% of name recognition, that's our path. And that's why this ad is so critical, because we have $7.5 million, thanks to the 18,000 people who contributed to our campaign, to spend in these next 2 months and make clear that we have a vision for making the city affordable. We're going to freeze the rent, make buses fast and free, deliver universal childcare, and we're the only mayoral candidate that aired an ad and the Knicks went on to win that same game.
Now, you have a goal of knocking on 1 million
Yes.
doors. How many doors have you knocked on, and what's been your favorite part?
230,000 doors so far across the 5 boroughs, thanks to the work of more than 15,000 volunteers. And what's so exciting to me is oftentimes in politics, we think about it as it's a competition between individuals. This campaign is about more than me. This campaign is about New Yorkers seeing themselves in the struggle for a city that they can actually afford. And I've had people come up to me and say, "You knocked on my door last night." And I said, "Actually, I was in Albany, so that was someone else. That was one of our volunteers." And that's what this campaign is. It's about everyone.
And exactly like you mentioned, you're splitting your time also between
Yes.
the state budget right now, negotiations up there in Albany. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer these tough questions and really address some of the concerns that New Yorkers have right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A leader deserves to do so. Thank you.